Welcome to Business of Being Black with Tammi Mack. I am Tammi Mack on Foxsoul. Hi, everyone. On July 2nd, 1964, President Lyndon B. Johnson signed the 1964 Civil Rights Act that prohibited discrimination in public places, provided for the integration of schools and other public facilities, and made employment discrimination illegal. It was the most sweeping civil rights legislation since Reconstruction. Almost 6 decades later, African Americans have successfully integrated into the middle class and attained wealth, giving white people the impression that Black people have attained equality. But in reality, America has failed to move beyond the hurdle of conscious public policies and discrimination against Black people, which brings us to the question, did integration help or harm Black America? The business of being Black today is integration, an American treasure or troll. Please welcome the founder of Mass Exodus and host of The Keisha King Show, Keisha King. Hi, Keisha.
Hi, Tammi. Thanks for having me.
Political commentator and the host of Pensive Politics, Christian Watson is here. Hi, Christian.
How you doing, Tammi? Thank you so much.
Advocate Heather Nash on deck. Hi, Heather.
Hello, how are you?
And journalist and founder of Context Media Group, Torin Walker. Hi, Torin.
Hey, Tammi. It's a pleasure to be here.
So the question that we ask traditionally on the business of being Black is, why should Black people care? Keisha, I'll start with you. Why should Black people care about integration?
I know for me, I remember hearing my family talk about this and saying we never should have integrated. I think that integration is good. And we were actually integrating on our own as Black people, white people. We were doing this all on our own. And when the government came in and made forced integration, I think that's when things got a little crazy. But I think integration as a whole, like I said, was happening all, by itself. People were just naturally moving and doing what people will do. And government, as usual, coming in with the heavy hand to make people do something that they were already doing. And actually, Jim Crow was came into being because Black and white people were moving together, doing business together. And so they were like, government, not so fast. Here's Jim Crow coming along to stop that process. But I think people will integrate naturally.
Torin, why should Black people care about integration?
Well, I think integration was a very good thing for a very small number of African Americans. But for the majority of African Americans, they are still, as you said at the top of the piece, have been left behind by a lot of these initiatives that got into place after Lyndon Johnson signed the Civil Rights Bill. We got to remember that before that bill was signed, yes, we had Jim Crow in this country, we had segregation, but you also had complete communities of Black people who had built their own businesses, where there was a place where, and it wasn't, people talk about little like Black Wall Street, but if you went around the country, there were cities all over America where Black people had their own enclaves where you had to go to a Black doctor. If you got in trouble, you had a Black lawyer, sometimes Black sheriff's departments. What happened with integration is that a lot of our best and brightest moved away from the Black community and let the Black community in the state that it's in now. So I say, yes, it was good for some people, but not for everybody else.
Heather, why should Black people care about integration?
Integration really hasn't really happened like it should. I think laws didn't go into place like they should have before they decided to make integration the biggest piece that came out. I totally disagree. I suffered through public education, especially in elementary school, because of the racism and just the unfairness of how they taught me in school. So no, just from my experience in elementary school alone tells me no, integration at least shouldn't have started for a while until we were able to get laws set in place.
Okay. I'm trying to, I want you all to ask why Black people should care, answer why Black people should care about it or not care about it. I haven't quite heard the answer to that yet, but Christian, why should Black people care or not care about integration?
Well, everyone should care about integration because integration affects an entire society. The quality and the extent of people in a certain society is going to impact everybody. It's going to impact how many welders or engineers you have in a certain community. It's going to impact the quality of your schools. It's going to impact the quality of your governments. I mean, this idea that we Black folks can just exist in these silos and still have the most enriching life ever is just not true. And it wasn't true in the terms of Black Wall Street, because yes, Black Wall Street was a Black enclave, but it wasn't as if there were Black folks that simply just stayed there and didn't go outside of that area to commune with other people. The few who weren't racist. I mean, there were. I mean, and Black Wall Street was basically just a small district of an entire other city. So no, everyone should care about integration because it affects everyone's quality of life and it affects the kind of society we have.
Thank you. So has integration helped to destabilize white privilege, Keisha?
Help to destabilize white privilege. I think that we're so focused on the skin color aspect, as if your skin color alone it makes you behave and do things in a certain way. Skin color, it's just levels of melanin. It doesn't think, it doesn't rationalize, it doesn't reason. We give so much credit to something that is really not, that deep. It's honestly, it's a mindset. How do you want to move into the world? What do you want to do? Where do you want to live? Where do you want to be? And so I think it's those types of things that we need to stay focused on, in the mindset of your community, the mindset of you as an individual, because just because we share the same skin color, it doesn't mean that we have to be collective and all be marching towards the same thing. I might want to do something else. I might want to do, whatever I want to do as an individual. And so I think that having so much focus on you being Black or white, it doesn't really serve society clearly. It doesn't serve any of us to be so hyper focused on, race and skin color. Let people do what they're going to do, live how they want to live. And in my estimation, I think the government needs to back off and let people just be.
Do you believe that if the government backs off and let people just be, we'd be in a better place?
I do. Like I said in the opening, before Jim Crow, which was a government instituted set of laws, we were already integrating naturally. I know my great grandparents were doing business in the South with white folks. These things were happening all over the country, but it was the government sponsored slavery, government redlining, government Jim Crow, the heavy hand of the government typically never produces anything good for the society. That's why it was important for us to have a limited government. But we've gone so far, from that. And
it's a lot to unpack there, because white folk were also lynching Black people. But then I just read an article, Torin, that said Wells Fargo had turned an enormous amount of Black people away from home loans. So when we talk about integration and we talk about let people do what they want to do, this is something that Wells Fargo chose to do. They chose not to lend money to Black people to buy homes. Is this the world we want to live in?
Well, I want to first respond to Keisha real quick. I understand what you mean when you say that government, there's this thing as too much big government, but we also have to look at the history of this. At the time after the Civil War, there was a period called Reconstruction where there were actually a lot of initiatives in place for freed Black men, for freed Black men and women. But those initiatives were backed up by federal troops. If you go take a look at the history, there were Black governors, there were Black senators, and all this work, all this progress was set up by federal troops. The minute those troops were pulled out is when the rise of the Ku Klux Klan happened, and a lot of that work was destroyed. But going back to your point, Tammy, what you're seeing with banks and what you're seeing with redlining and what you're seeing with discrimination in housing is something that's always happened in this country. And integration, I don't think, has really moved the needle on that too much. We've had a few people who are able to persevere and transcend that, but the Black middle class is a very small group compared to the majority of us. And I don't think looking at one group of us and a small group of us can say that we've all progressed. We're all a collective.
Christian.
If if I might, just for the historical record. So the Klan first emerged in the 1870s, and they emerged under President Ulysses S. Grant, who was a Union general. And in the 1870s, Grant urged Congress to pass the Ku Klux Klan Act, which allowed him to gave him more law enforcement tools to handle the Klan in the South. And he also, before that even happened, he suspended the writ of habeas corpus and went in there and arrested a bunch of Klansmen himself. I mean, getting rid of the Klan was actually part of the radical Republicans who were spearheading the Reconstruction effort. I mean, there's an argument to be made that Reconstruction itself is actually quite harmful to efforts to integrate, because there were a lot of people in the South who were bitter and angry, some of whom weren't racist whatsoever, some of whom had their property burnt down and destroyed by a zealous Union general called Sherman, who just walked through an entire state and razed it indiscriminately. So there, you have to address, the legitimate concerns that a lot of people had back then, and then also address how those concerns connected to a broader disdain towards people who don't look like you. I'm not saying those concerns were correct or valid. Many of them were founded in bigotry, but you don't give bigotry more fuel so that its fire can get bigger. You give it less fuel, and dividing the South into military districts was exactly what the government did. It was not a way to create cooperation, only resentment.
Torrin, did you want to reply?
I did. No, look, I think that's something that happens in this country, especially politically, where we put too much concern and too much emphasis on the feelings of racists instead of trying to get justice for people who have been wrong for centuries. And I think that has to stop. I understand what you're saying, and I understand that it's a very, it's a very important thing that you're saying. But if the Civil War if what happened after the Civil War would have happened, where the people who were in insurrection, and I'm talking about Lee, Davis, and all those people had been punished the way they were supposed to have been, a lot of that could have been avoided. People were going to be resentful anyway because they felt like their property was taken from them, which was slaves and human capital. But let's
take a quick break on that note, and we'll be right back on Business of Being Black with Tammi Mack. Oh! Welcome back to Business of Being Black with Tammi Mack. I'm Tammi Mack. Please welcome the founder of Mass Exodus and host of the Keisha King Show, Keisha King, political commentator and the host of Pensive Politics, Christian Watson, is here with us again. Advocate Heather Nash on board, and journalist and founder of Context Media Group, Torrin Walker, is here. The business of being Black today, integration in America. Did it help or did it hurt us? Heather, you spoke earlier in the show about how integration hurt you personally. Can you share that story with us?
When I first went to elementary school, I started out in North Tulsa, which is predominantly Black, kind of in the Greenwood area.
So let us know this. When you went to elementary school, what year would that have been?
Kindergarten. So
I mean, what year though?
That would have been 75, 76.
76.
76. So in 76, I went to well, it was a Black school, Black neighborhood. My mom and dad owned a house in North Tulsa. They got a divorce. We were still living in the home, but we had been broken in so many times that my mother had just gotten fed up with living in North Tulsa and decided that she'd move out South. Well, out South is predominantly white, middle class, upper middle class white people. So we get to South Tulsa. Let me go back to the Black school. At the Black school is where I learned my dark skin was a little bit not appreciated. Whereas when I got to the white school, that wasn't the issue. The issue was I had no business being there in the first place. From the cafeteria worker all the way to the school principal. I just wasn't supposed to be there. And I was mistreated. There were several Black kids there. I didn't fold like other Black kids did, and I didn't kind of adapt either. It was a struggle. I remember being in Girl Scouts and only wanting to be in Girl Scouts because I liked what Girl Scouts did. And I was a brownie. And my Girl Scout leader's mom was actually, my Girl Scout leader's daughter was in my class. And she was also the PTA president. And we had a camp out one time and she wanted us to do s'mores. And I didn't know what a s'mores was. So I was like, what's a s'mores? Because all the little white girls were going on about, oh, we're going to have s'mores. We're going to have s'mores. And I didn't know what it was. So they told me what it was. I was like, oh, that sounds like it might be good. We get to the camp out place. And it's me, my sister, and 2 or 3 other little Black girls. and purposely served last. And she had ran out of graham crackers. So I heard her say, well, I have toast. And so the other Girl Scout leader looks at her and says, I don't think toast is going to work. And she goes, no, I made the toast for them. I made it for them so that if we ran out. And she said, well, why wouldn't you get graham crackers? So the white lady that was a little frustrated that she did that faded toward the back. And she says, well, just serve it to them anyway. So I'm ticked.
So, but it sounds like integration from your perspective, first of all, was much like Keisha suggested. It was a voluntary thing. Your parents moved you out of a neighborhood that was bad to put you into a better neighborhood, but it just didn't work out to your advantage in terms of how you were treated. And this was in 1976. So we're not even talking about the 60s or the 50s or the 40s, that you were being mistreated amongst white people simply because you were Black. Is that right, Heather?
Yeah, I learned a whole lot of things about racism as far as what I could and couldn't do. I knew when to do something, when not to do something. Like if there was a guest in the classroom, I couldn't go up and talk to the guest. I knew that the white kids could, but as soon as me or the other little boy in my classroom went up to talk to the guest, it became a big problem. So I learned how to manage. And there's a double-edged sword to that, because on one side, I was jealous of Black kids that went to predominantly Black schools, but I was also grateful in some ways because I learned how to manage how to deal with white people when I got much older.
And I think that is what this generation and this turn of the century is trying to, I think this is more of what today's civil rights movement is. It's about not having to manage or learn or adjust to white culture in order to be a part of America. I think that is what this civil rights movement is about today. Christian, would you agree or disagree with that?
I wouldn't consider that a matter of civil rights per se, because civil rights regards things that the treatment of people in ways that are not just that the government has done. I think that's a new social movement today that is built upon this idea that there is a white culture. I don't believe that. I don't even think there's a Black culture, really. I think there's just culture. Culture is simply a bunch of activities that people in different geographies around the world do, but no one person has a monopoly over culture. I have Black friends who wear kimonos and swing katanas and watch Japanese anime cartoons. Are they any less Black because they do that? And me, I mean, personally, what is called Black culture, I don't really identify with, but I identify with aspects of a lot of different cultures. So yeah, I like R&B. I like 90s R&B, even though it's predominantly a Black dominated field. I enjoy listening to Patti LaBelle. I enjoy watching Black comedians, but I also enjoy listening to white comedians and Asian comedians and watching Asian movies and watching all kinds of other things. I think culture is simply what we make it. It's not appended to our skin color. And the moment we can get past this idea that culture and your value are appended to your skin color is the moment we can actually see things for how they are, not as we perceive them through our narrow racial lenses.
Right. Torin, you said that integration helped reinforce a fantasy of Black elitism that left most Black Americans behind and Black children unprepared. This is exactly what Heather just talked about. Her family moving out of this space where they were constantly being robbed and moving into a better space. But then she was unprepared for what she was about to experience with those s'mores.
Yeah, and unfortunately, we still hear these stories in the modern day. I mean, if you go on social media, almost every day, you see a young Black girl or a young Black boy in a restaurant or someplace where they're being accosted by somebody who's white or somebody who's racist, and they don't have the tools of how to push back against that sort of stuff. And it's sad to see that because it's the year 2022, and we have these kids who are still dealing with this sort of stuff. So my question is, if integration works so well, why aren't the parents preparing these kids for what the real world is like? And I understand the point about that. Yeah, we live in a world of cultures and we live in a world of different cultures, but this is still a Eurocentric, white dominated society that we live in. And you're going to have to learn how to deal with that one way or the other, or it's going to deal with you, unfortunately.
When some of the highest achievers in this nation are Ethiopian and African immigrants and Asian people, I have a hard time believing we're in a Eurocentric dominated culture. It makes no sense. That makes no sense to me. What? Yeah.
You're talking about the idea of the model minority, and every immigrant culture that comes to America becomes a model minority. That doesn't have anything to do with the fact that Black Americans are still at the bottom of every socioeconomic metric in this country. 1 or 2
So,
minorities is not an integration negative.
This is a common tactic to de-emphasize and degrade the accomplishments of people who had much less than African Americans have in America, who have made it here through their genius, through their talents, through their wit. It's just an attack to do that. Booker T. Washington was correct. If Black folks simply work and put their minds to it, and get community, that can help them. And even W.E.B. Du Bois, who didn't like Washington whatsoever, said the Black race will be saved by its best men. And that's the mentality we have to cultivate in people, not this idea that the entire world is still racist, that Black kids, all of them, still deal with racism. I mean, what if a Black kid has never dealt with a race situation before? Does their experience become invalid? I mean, we live in a culturally plural society in which a lot of different things happen. And if you have this lens that racism is involved in every minor thing, like this idea of microaggressions, you'll never be able to escape the idea of racism being there.
Keisha, I know you wanted to get in on this. Go ahead.
I do, because because of social media and because we have these clips of these brief moments that happen in time, we assume that that's what every, in particular Black people, what every Black person is experiencing on a regular basis. There are 330 million people in America, 40 million Black people, and to take a clip from social media or to take a moment, a news story that runs across the news, and to assume that that is the Black experience and that we have to, raise our children to be, weary of some white person that, is doing whatever. I just do not subscribe to that. Our accomplishments in this country, Black people's accomplishments in this country, we have exceeded. I mean, we came from nothing. And it's like, just because racism will always exist.
Let's take a quick break right there. Come right back on Business of Being Black with Tammi Mack. Welcome back to Business of Being Black with Tammi Mack. I'm Tammi Mack, and the business of being Black today is integration in America. Did it help? Did it harm? What's going on? Okay, so Christian spoke about Booker T. Washington. Let's go there. Booker T. did believe that Black people should rely upon themselves for self-help, whereas W.E.B. Du Bois thought the most talented Blacks should learn from whites and bring these attributes back to the Black community. All in all, they're both saying we should be self-sufficient. What is your point of view when it comes to that, Heather?
I grew up in Tulsa, Oklahoma, so I got to see Black people to some degree be successful. A lot of people think that Greenwood went away after 1921, but it actually rebuilt itself. And so I can remember being hanging out on Greenwood in front of Mr. Cannon's store with my mom while my daddy got a haircut. And we're seeing the businesses and the Black people walking up and down the street. So we got to see the success. And I think that's part of the problem with integration. Black people left the community, and it was the middle class Black people that left the community and left it high and dry when their supporters, their main supporters, were people who were poor that provided them the financial stability to be middle class and upper middle class.
Torrin, I see you shaking your head in agreement.
That's absolutely right. The minute that ink was dry on that civil rights bill, a lot of our best and brightest in the upper class and the middle class got as far away from the rest of Black people as they could. And what happened with that was you left a brain drain, and you also left an economic vacuum where people who were still politically active but didn't have the resource and they didn't have the access to get capital or didn't have the resources to know where to go were basically at the mercy of big city halls. And what happened with that was there was gentrification that came in. There was benign neglect that happened after that. There was a lot of things where you see, like, even if you look at the interstate highway system, where a lot of neighborhoods were decimated by interstate highways, completely destroyed the fabric of those communities. I think that's what integration did for a lot of us. And I think that's what the issue is with integration, in my opinion.
So let's talk about busing then, Keisha. Black schools closed when children were bused out of their neighborhoods rather than providing them with appropriate funding to allow them to compete with non-Black schools. Did integration benefit Black students in any way?
I do think integration did benefit Black students in some ways. However, I do think that the onus falls back on us. If Black people were leaving when the Civil Rights Bill happened and Black people, for whatever reason, they wanted to leave, the onus is on that community and the people that live there to fill that void and say, okay, how do we figure this out? I mean, clearly we were capable to build this, enrich our neighborhoods and have successful Black businesses. If you can do it once, you can do it again, just like Ms. Heather said. And because Tulsa came back. So the onus goes back to us. What do we want to see in neighborhoods? I don't think that we should be, I am of the mind that as an individual, you look around and you say, okay, well, what can I do to better my community? And you step up and you figure it out. I mean, is it easy? No, but many things, just like in everything, if it's worth having, it might not be easy to get. And so we have to take responsibility and be accountable for our own community, not say, well, they left. And so, it's just, they left us high and dry. Okay, well, then your children are still in that community. So what are you going to do to make sure that there are stores and grocery stores and that the community still thrives? So I don't believe that we should look outside constantly, exteriorly, for somebody to come and fix our problems.
I think that, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Heather.
Well, I was going to say Tulsa came back, but Tulsa was also destroyed by redlining, by a highway going through the middle of Greenwood. It shut us completely off. Not only that, when integration happened and they moved kids into North, and you got to remember, most kids didn't leave North Tulsa and go. I mean, most kids didn't leave South Tulsa and come into North Tulsa to get an education. They went into South Tulsa because most of those good Black teachers left and went south because they were forced to. We even lost our good schools. My mother even told me when she was a little girl, slow kids learn to read.
So Heather has a point here. Let's talk about Tulsa, since that's her experience, Christian. Tulsa, Black, self-sufficient, and then they destroyed the Black community that was self-sufficient. Do we not account for that? Does America not account for that? Is that not the fault of white America?
Well, Tammi, there is no white America. There are white individuals, some of whom are racist, and some of whom actually were some of the first people to sign up for the civil rights struggle. Such people who fought on the case with Brown versus Board of Education with Thurgood Marshall. He had a bunch of white attorneys helping him.
So we do believe that there is some percentage of America that is racist. We're not just casting out racism altogether.
Sure, okay. There is a percentage, but that doesn't mean that all white people or even most white people are racist. I mean, that's just an idea that is just as prejudicial as thinking that all Black people are also some inferior quality, which is just also not true. I mean, yes, Tulsa was built up. It was very successful. Greenwood, rather, was built up, but very successful. And a bunch of marauders went through and burnt it down. But unfortunately, for many people, that's where the story ends. The story does not talk about how amazing it was that the former slave colony went basically into the city, freed slaves, went into the city and quite literally built up one of the most shining examples, testaments to capitalism and prosperity in American history, even more so than many white areas were. They owning entire fleets of jets, owning their own early model taxi services. That's the story. The fact that it was burnt down is incidental to the principle. And that same principle that exists in Tulsa in an era where there was no internet, where there was very little connection beyond your geographical area, can especially exist in an era where there is more connection, where the digital age does reign and skills can be easily transferred over the internet and through other forms of knowledge. So that's why I don't buy the victimhood mentality, because we have more possibility than we have ever had in the history of this world, and more resources than we've ever had in the history of this world to create wealth and prosperity for everybody, not just Black, but for everybody. But some people just want to sit down, bury their head in a narrow reading of the historical record and say racism existed, it was bad, and it's still impacting us, without actually looking at what we can do to materially impact what's going on right now.
So Torrin, he has a point. Listen, how long are we going to talk about this racism issue? And how long are Black people going to want to integrate into what is not white America, according to Christian? I mean, in order to integrate, there has to be there has to be a white America, Black. Otherwise, what are we integrating into? What is integration? Does it not exist at all? I'm not sure if that's the suggestion, Torrin.
Well, here's the thing. There's no getting around the fact that America is built on racism, and that there's a lot of things that are in place institutionally that perpetuate a lot of the things that happen to Black people in this country. I don't care what you say. I don't care what your opinion is. That's just a cold, hard fact. Now, that doesn't mean that Black people in this country have not been able to persevere through that and thrive through that. But the fact of the matter that people in Tulsa were able to create a Black Wall Street, and then it was destroyed by a white racist marauding gang who used a false pretense to go in and destroy that success. That's something that has to be addressed. And it's not just Tulsa. We're talking about Tulsa because the sister Heather is here, but that happened in about 12, 13 different self-sustained communities all around America. It happened in Rosewood. It happened in Little Rock. It happened in a lot of places. And I'm saying that mentality, even though you may not see marauding gangs of racists, they still exist. They just work in suits and they work in ties and they work in legal professions. They work in redlining. They work in real estate. And until we start dealing with that and deal with the fact that we live in a society that has that, we're never going to get past that.
But I want to address here, and Heather or Torin, you can answer this question, because when Keisha and Christian suggest that if Black folks pull themselves up by their bootstraps and get to working and doing, what they should do to rise above, there is something to that, because we do have those Black folk, like everyone on this panel, who have risen with quite some success. So then what is it that we're missing when it comes to integration?
The
well,
mindset.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. Can I answer, Tammy?
Yeah.
Thank you. It's a mindset. Because the moment, anytime there is chaos in any other, if you look at when Wall Street crashed, when you look at things that are happening today, anytime that there is chaos, there is opportunity. And those who take away that narrow mindset, when you move past the race thing, you can see the opportunity. But if you're constantly focused on, well, it's just racism, racism's not going anywhere. Just like any other sin on this side of heaven, as long as we're here, we're going to have problems, and we're going to have racism, we're going to have murder, we're going to have all types of things. But racism is that one thing that it has to be completely gone before we can, figure out how to move forward.
Let's be completely gone right now to commercial. Welcome back to Business of Being Black with Tammi Mack. I'm Tammi Mack, and the business of being Black today is integration. Was it helpful or harmful to America? Please welcome the founder of Mass Exodus and host of the Keisha King Show, Keisha King. Political commentator and the host of Pensive Politics, Christian Watson. Advocate Heather Nash is with us today, and journalist and founder of Context Media Group, Torin Walker, is with us today as well. Keisha, I want you to get your thought out from when we last left for break there.
Thank you, Tammy. So I was just saying that we have to stop being so responsive whenever we see racism. It's always going to be there. There is nothing we can do about it. Just like any other sin, if you want to call it that, there's nothing we can do about those. We don't have to, racism seems to be the only thing that has to be completely eradicated before we can move forward as Black people and do what we want to do with our own individual lives. I am sick. Honestly, I'm just tired of that being our barrier. We can seem to overcome all types of trauma, all types of, ills that befall us as people. But when it comes to racism, it's like, it happened. So therefore we can't do anything and it has to be gone. We can do whatever we want to do as long as we apply ourselves, especially today. There is nothing that can hold us down, that can hold Black people back. If your mind is set and focused, you go and do and be whatever you want to be. That is what I'm telling my children, and it's certainly what I tell myself.
Heather, you've gone through this point in your life where you've had to overcome racism. When you talked about being integrated into a white school, leaving your Black school, how do you deal with it? How does that work? Is Keisha right? You mean you seem to have gotten over it and gotten through it?
I did. Life lesson was, I learned a life lesson. I experienced racism, almost on a daily basis. So for me, it was a good time for me to learn how to manage, how to deal with white folks in America. But also, I learned how the law works so that I could be able to be more successful in my life too. And I got my degree in political science and I got a master's in communications, but I also have 3 children. I have a daughter who's a coach at Auburn University, a son who's a police officer in Memphis, and then I have a little boy that plays tennis. So we've done things that, and I'm gonna be honest, some things I learned best from white people. Some white people party the best to me. Sometimes the party goes a little too.
I probably got to disagree with you on that one, Heather. I don't know about that. I don't know. We get our cha-cha slide in, sis.
Yeah, we do that. But I think.
I want you to talk about the Plessy versus Ferguson Supreme Court decision and why you believe that separate but equal would have been better for the Black community.
Oh, I really believe that, especially because of my elementary experiences. I just felt like I spent too much time being focused on being a Black girl and being worried about what I did wrong in the classroom. I got blamed for a lot of stuff. To me, my classwork was always the last thing I focused on because I dealt with so much. Kids that I played with on the playground, I wasn't invited to a birthday party because of those type of things. My mom wouldn't they wouldn't let me come because their mom wouldn't let me go. So it was too many experiences with me just being simply Black. And that wasn't my focus, but that was theirs at the time. And so,
right. I heard Keisha earlier saying, well, we shouldn't focus on being Black or being white, but it seemed like white folks focus more on us than we focus on them, to be honest. Torin, go ahead.
No, she's absolutely right. And that's the thing. You can't discount being a Black person, and you can't discount what that means being in the society and being in America. I was fortunate enough to where I grew up in a neighborhood, and I grew up in a city that was predominantly Black. So I had, Black mentors around me. I had Black teachers. I didn't see a white teacher until I got to senior high school. And what that does is, if you have a shared culture, that puts you in a space where you don't see yourself as an outlier. But when you get out into the wider world, you see yourself as someone connected to a culture and you don't feel like an outsider. And I think that's what we lost in a lot of integration. Like a couple of people on the panel talked about other ethnic groups and how they've been able to achieve. African Americans have done that too. But I think what we've given up is the idea of a community. What you see now, if you go to any major city, you will see a Koreatown, you'll see a Chinatown, you'll see even ethnic enclaves of people who are connected to the United States, obviously, but they still have their culture, they still have their food shops, they still have their schools sometimes where they teach their kids. We don't have that anymore because we've integrated so much into the society that we don't have a Black community anymore. We just have individuals, and I think that's very dangerous for us in this society.
So let me ask you, do you believe separate but equal would have worked better?
I think it would have worked better if we figured out a way to do that with keeping our community and still be able to trade and work with everybody else the way every other ethnic group does. I think if it was imposed on us through white racism and white supremacy, then obviously we got the result that we got. But if we could have come into the society on somewhat of a feeling where like, this is what we have to offer, this is what we can bring in, this is what we can build as a community, then yes, I think it would have worked.
Can I?
Go ahead.
Yeah. One thing I will say is I struggled in school, especially when it came to learning about my history. If it wasn't for my mom and dad providing me with the Ebony magazine and Jet stuff, I had withdrawals about not seeing Black people. I at least had to go to North Tulsa on the weekend. But I'm saying that to say I grew up in Oklahoma. Oklahoma, a lot of people don't know, and we have a really rich Black history that most people don't know. And I learned it on my own. We have 27 all Black towns and townships in Oklahoma. 52 in the country, 27 are in Oklahoma. That's because they was going to make Oklahoma an all-Black state. That is rich history that we don't know about. Also, in those Black townships, we had land. They gave us land because we were freedmen. Those are things that were important to me that would have helped me be a little bit better as a student. I wasn't a troubled kid at all. I didn't get in trouble. But I struggled because I didn't even have an opportunity to learn my history. I learned theirs, and they didn't even get an opportunity to learn ours. When the book opened to somebody that looked like me, it was slavery, or it was Martin Luther King. It was somebody white, friendly, for them to be able to adjust and say, well, I like him. But I never got the experience of learning who we were and all the great things we did. And like most people tell you, Tulsa, Oklahoma, they didn't even know 1921. My grandmother was a survivor. That's how I knew.
Well, I'm glad you knew a little more than the beauty of the week there. You threw out that Ebony and that Jet. I was like, I hope your reading expands a little further than the Ebony and the Jet. So, praise God. Yes. All right. Christian, do segregation and integration have to do more with race than with being poor or disenfranchised?
What do you mean? Do you mean, are they based on race?
Yeah, is segregation based on race, or is it based on your status in America more so?
Well, I think if we think segregation is separation, then everyone is separated from a certain extent because everyone has different experiences, different skills, different income in life. And that's simply natural. Not everyone is meant to meld together, but that has nothing to do with race and everything to do with your value system, everything to do with what you put into life. The problem with the segregationists is that they think that certain races are not meant to meld together, or in the case of the Black segregationists, they think that the Black community ought to stick together on the basis of their race and not interact with anyone else, which is a preposterous idea because, once again, life is not rich if we don't have people with a variety of experiences interacting and sharing their knowledge. And not only that, but there's no such thing as Black culture or white culture. There is simply activities that individuals do that correlate with what some geographic, with some culture did in a geography. And what is a Black person if they wear Japanese garb and wield katanas? Are they any less of a Black person? Of course not, because culture is activity. Culture is not your skin color. And that's something that is being missed here. This idea that if I consider myself an individual, I'm doing something dangerous, as the fellow just said. But that's not true, because guess what? Culture relates to social context, but the individual is a fact of existence. Regardless of what culture you exist in, you are an individual by the mere fact that you're a human being. And that's what needs to be talked about here. The philosophy of what being an individual means, independent of any cultural context.
Torin, you agree?
I do not. I agree that culture is an individual thing, and also culture is a larger thing. But at the same time, you have to take in the context of the fact that you are Black in this society, and regardless of what you're into, that doesn't make you an outsider, but it makes you Black in society, and you have to realize that.
What society?
You're talking about American society, correct?
What is American society? Is it Chinatown? Is it Koreatown? Is it Kansas? Is it Texas? What society? When we speak in these broad terms, we can make anything make sense. But when you actually narrow them down and subject them to scrutiny, it doesn't make sense. So I don't know what society.
Let's take a quick break right now, because that makes sense. Welcome back to Business of Being Black with Tammi Mack. The business of being Black today is integration. Did it help or hurt America? Christian was talking about these different societies that don't really exist, these different cultures, because America is just one complete society. Torin, you found fault in that.
Yeah. If you look at the macro, America is one giant society. But if we look at the micro, this is a culture and this is a country with a lot of different societies that are trying to coexist at once. And if we're going to talk about culture, we have to talk about the fact that, there is definite distinct cultures here. There's Black culture, there's different myriads of culture in that. There's white culture, and there's different myriad things in that. But we also have to talk about the economic ideas of culture and what that means. Because look, I don't care where you go in the world, Black culture influences everything. And there is a distinct African-American culture that influences everything from hip hop to dance to art to everything else. And if we're going to talk about that, we also have to talk about who profits from that. We create these cultures, we create these different things that are cultural, and who gets the benefit from that. I mean, look at what's going on. If you look at music, all the way back to the 1920s, you had jazz musicians, you had like R&B musicians, you had all these people who made this stuff, but who benefited from it. It wasn't Black people, it wasn't Black culture, and a lot of times it wasn't even the musicians or the artists. So if we're going to talk about culture, we have to codify what culture is, and we have to see what does that really mean for us as a people, and how can we use these things to benefit us. I'm just using that as an example, but there is a definite culture in the society, and we have to be able to take advantage of that, like everyone else does.
Go ahead, Christian.
I still don't know what Black culture is. I mean, listening to a certain type of music does not make you any more authentically Black than it does not. If that's the case, then I mean that's just a stereotype. And also,
we're not talking about being authentically Black. I'm talking about the fact that there's a definite culture.
What is Black culture? What does that mean?
It can mean a million different things. I'm not saying it's all one specific thing.
Then
I'm just saying that
nothing.
There is a distinct Black culture. There's a way of moving. There's a way of speaking. There's a way of music.
If it's incalculable, if it can mean a million different things, then we can't define it. Then it's not really a useful term for us. But back to one of your original points about the music industry.
I think that culture is a way that a person has been raised. Denzel Washington made an excellent example of that when asked, could someone who wasn't Black create a specific type of movie that was that was about Black people? And he said, of course, someone who's not Black could direct a movie that was about Black people, but they wouldn't be able to achieve the nuances. And he used specifically the nuance of a pressing comb and how that smells when you walk into a kitchen. I don't think there is any other culture other than Black culture that knows the nuance of the smell of a pressing comb. That is specific to Black people, and Black people only, I might add. There's not a white, an Asian, a Hispanic that knows the stench of a pressing comb when it hits the back of your kitchen. And that,
I don't know that to be true. I don't know that to be true. I mean, a pressing
I
comb
bet
is
my
not.
life on it, because no one presses their hair other than Black people.
But what about Black people who have never been around a pressing comb? I mean, are they somehow not participating in Black culture? This is the problem. This is the problem. There is no Black culture.
That's just one example, though. But there's a million different examples of that. And like Tammi said, there's also situations where, like, if you're a Black person, sometimes two Black people can not even know each other. But if they see something together and they look at each other, they both know there's a communication that happens right then, and you don't even have to have a word to say anything about it.
But in the same vein, there is also a culture for different people of different ethnicities. I think culture exists. We can't say that culture does not exist, Christian.
No, it definitely exists. My thing is, it's not based on skin color. Again, I have Black friends who watch Japanese anime, who wear Japanese garb, who fight with katanas, who watch Bruce Lee movies, and I don't know what to say their culture is. Is it Japanese culture? Perhaps it is. We can choose what our culture is. That's my thing. Not everyone who's Black has had the same experiences in terms of culture. Some people have had different experiences. Some people have had that experience with the comb, but other people have not had that experience with the comb. My point is, when we try to say Black culture, that leads us to a wider range of assumptions that, if we actually examine what we're saying, may not make any sense.
Majority do experience.
Majority where? Majority where?
I'm not going to argue that, but Black people in general do experience the pressing comb experience. There is a culture, and I don't think Asian people would feel like their culture wasn't a culture. And America does not really have a culture. It really doesn't.
All I'm saying is that we choose culture. It's not based on our skin color. That's all. Culture exists, and it's important, but we choose it.
Culture and a lot of experiences are based on your skin culture, and that's a universal thing. And if you are a Black person with a certain skin tone, there are certain experiences that are going to find you, whether you want to believe it or not. If you don't believe it, what's happening in Ukraine right now? Those people in the Ukraine right now thought they were Ukrainians, but what happened when they tried to get out?
Exactly.
So let's talk about, Christian, your podcast, Pensive Politics, how we can find it, what it's about.
Oh, well, you can just go on YouTube in Christian Pensive Politics, and you'll get right to my YouTube channel where my podcast lives. And I appreciate you letting me be on today. It's awesome.
Oh, all the time. Thank you so much for always coming on the show when we ask, Christian. I appreciate it. Torin, let's talk about your project as well, about the Context Media Group. What's it about?
Well, Context Media Group is a media outlet that I formed to give people who were unheard or were basically ignored by news outlets a place to be heard. I go into, lower income Black communities. I talk to people who are on the block, who are involved in activism, and I give them voices. So that's what I try to do. And I'm working on a documentary about that right now.
Keisha, the mass exodus movement, where are we exiting, my sis?
We are exiting this crazy public school system. The mass exodus movement aims to help children find better learning environments. And you can go to KeishaKing.com or massexodusmovement.com and find out more information on either one of those.
I find it interesting that that's your platform, and Heather shared her school experience on the show. I was just like, oh, this is interesting, because this is what Keisha does with her platform. So I'm sure you and Heather could connect in some kind of way in that. Heather, talk about the work you do, Black Flower Society.
We actually do reading programs in the summertime. We do a lot of programming that help the community be able to get a better sense of who we are in the community, so that we can build a better community. So we do activities that create a safe space and place for Black kids to see Black people doing good things in our community for them. One of our biggest push is the reading program, and our reading program last year, well, the year before last, because last year we didn't do it because of COVID, but the year before last, our kids' reading scores went up anywhere from 18 to 30 points. So our main push is making sure that Black children are being able to read very well so that they can get through school. A lot of the education that our kids get in North Tulsa is not from a good school district. Our reading scores in North Tulsa are extremely low.
Got it. So I'd like to know from each of you in one or two words, how America can integrate successfully. How can we be a successful nation in terms of its people and how we are built together, Christian?
Cooperation.
Cooperation. I like that word. That's a good one. Cooperation. Keisha.
Leave us alone. The government, leave us alone. Sorry, I can't
get the government out. Get the government out. That's a good one. That's a good 3 words. Get the government out. Torin, how can we integrate successfully?
Rebuild the community first.
Which community?
The Black community, all of us.
Heather, I give you the last one. How can we integrate successfully?
I think we have to come up with a better education system, especially for Black children.
Yeah. Yeah, education is hard for African Americans. And I would think that education is hard for those who are in a disenfranchised area of America. It's not so good. Thank you all for being on Business of Being Black. Keisha, Christian, Torin, and Heather. Right now, stick around for Vivica Fox because she's in the Foxsoul screening room on Foxsoul. Until next time, everybody, it's truly a blessing to be in your box on Business of Being Black with Tammi Mack.